Have you ever found yourself desperately scrolling through social media after someone criticized you, searching for comments that might validate your worth? Have you ever felt that familiar ache in your chest when a text goes unanswered? Or when someone doesn't react to your carefully crafted post the way you hoped they would? Maybe you've caught yourself reshaping your opinions in conversations, not because you've genuinely changed your mind, but because you need to be liked, to be accepted, to be seen as valuable by others. If any of this sounds familiar, then you're trapped in what I call validation addiction. And let me tell you something that might sting at first, but will ultimately set you free. As long as you need other people's approval to feel good about yourself, you will never truly be in control of your own life. You will always be dancing to someone else's rhythm, always performing for an audience that doesn't even care about your well-being. Carl Jung, one of the most profound psychologists who ever lived, understood something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The need for external validation is not just a harmless quirk or a small weakness. It's a prison. It's a psychological cage that keeps you small, keeps you reactive, keeps you living according to other people's expectations rather than your own authentic truth. But here's what Jung also knew, and what I want you to understand by the end of this journey we're taking together. You have the power to break free from this addiction. You have the ability to become someone who doesn't need constant reassurance, constant approval, constant validation from the outside world. You can become someone who is genuinely self-possessed, genuinely confident, genuinely free. This isn't about becoming cold or indifferent. It's not about shutting people out or pretending you don't care about anything. It's about something far more powerful and far more rare. Becoming someone who knows their own worth without needing anyone else to confirm it. Think about the people in your life who seem to have this quality. They don't seek attention, yet they command it. They don't beg for respect, yet they receive it naturally. They don't need to prove themselves constantly, yet somehow everyone knows they're solid, they're real, they're unshakable. What do these people have that you don't? What do they know that you haven't learned yet? The answer lies in understanding what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, not who others expect you to be. It's the journey from living for external approval to living from your own inner authority. And this journey, I won't lie to you, requires courage. It requires you to face some uncomfortable truths about yourself, about your patterns, about the ways you've been giving your power away without even realizing it. But first, let's understand exactly what we're dealing with. Validation addiction isn't just about wanting people to like you. It runs much deeper than that. It's about having constructed your entire sense of self on the shifting sands of other people's opinions. It's about believing, somewhere deep down, that you're not enough on your own, that your worth depends on external confirmation. This shows up in so many ways. Maybe you find yourself constantly explaining your decisions to others, even when they haven't asked. Maybe you over-apologize, saying sorry for things that aren't your fault or that don't require an apology. Maybe you find it almost impossible to say no, even when saying yes will drain you or compromise your own values. Or perhaps it's more subtle. Maybe you notice that your mood depends entirely on how others treat you on any given day. One harsh comment can ruin your entire week, while one compliment can make you feel like you're walking on air. You've become an emotional weather vane, constantly shifting based on the winds of other people's approval or disapproval. Jung would say that this happens because you've lost touch with what he called the self. That deep, authentic core of who you are that exists independent of anyone else's opinion. Instead, you've been living from what he called the persona, the mask you wear to be accepted by others. The persona isn't evil or wrong, but when it becomes your entire identity, when you forget that there's a real person behind the mask, you lose yourself. And here's the cruel irony. The more you chase validation, the less likely you are to receive genuine respect and love. People can sense desperation. They can feel it when someone needs their approval too much. And paradoxically, this neediness often pushes people away, or worse, attracts people who will exploit your need for validation. You become an easy target for manipulators, for people who understand that they can control you through your need for their approval. You become someone who can be guilt-tripped, someone who can be made to feel responsible for other people's emotions, someone who will sacrifice their own needs to keep others happy. But what if I told you that everything you think you know about confidence and self-worth is backwards? What if the path to genuine confidence isn't about getting better at winning people's approval, but about becoming someone who doesn't need it in the first place? This is where most people get confused. They think that confidence comes from being successful, from being attractive, from being smart or funny or talented. But Jung understood something deeper. True confidence comes from integration, from knowing and accepting all parts of yourself, even the parts you'd rather hide. The validation addict is constantly trying to present a perfect image to the world. They're always performing, always trying to be what they think others want them to be. But this performance is exhausting, and it's ultimately futile because you can never control what others think of you. You can never guarantee their approval, no matter how hard you try. So instead of trying to be perfect for others, what if you learn to be real for yourself? What if you stopped trying to be who you think others want you to be and started discovering who you actually are? This is the beginning of what Jung called the individuation process, and it's the only path to genuine freedom from validation addiction. Now, I want to be clear about something. This journey isn't about becoming selfish or narcissistic. It's not about not caring about others or about becoming cold and disconnected. People who are truly individuated, who have done the work of knowing themselves, actually become more capable of genuine love and connection, not less. When you're not constantly seeking validation, you're free to love others without hidden agendas. You're free to help others without needing them to be grateful. You're free to be yourself without needing others to approve of who you are. This is true strength, true confidence, true freedom. But getting there requires you to face something that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. The parts of yourself that you've been hiding, the parts that you're afraid others won't accept. Jung called this the shadow, and it's the key to understanding why you need validation in the first place. You see, validation addiction often stems from a deep fear that if people really knew you, if they saw all of you, they would reject you. So you hide parts of yourself. You present only the parts you think are acceptable, and you constantly seek reassurance that this edited version of yourself is worthy of love. But here's what Jung discovered. The parts of yourself that you're most afraid to show are often the parts that contain your greatest strength and authenticity. The anger you've been suppressing might contain your passion and your boundaries. The sadness you've been hiding might contain your depth and your compassion. The parts of yourself that you think are unacceptable might actually be the keys to your freedom. This doesn't mean you should go around being inappropriate or harmful to others. It means you need to stop rejecting parts of yourself. Stop trying to be perfect. Stop believing that you need to earn love by being something you're not. When you begin to accept all parts of yourself, something magical happens. You stop needing others to accept you because you've already accepted yourself. You stop needing external validation because you've developed internal validation. You stop being afraid of rejection because you're no longer rejecting yourself. This is the foundation of what Jung called psychological wholeness. It's not about being perfect. It's about being complete. It's about integrating all aspects of your personality, even the ones you'd rather pretend don't exist. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop needing people's approval, you often start receiving more genuine respect and love than you ever did when you were chasing it. People are drawn to authenticity. They're attracted to people who are comfortable in their own skin, who don't need constant reassurance, who aren't performing for approval. But this transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, and it requires patience with yourself. It requires you to start noticing your patterns, your triggers, your automatic responses. It requires you to start questioning the beliefs you've held about yourself and about what makes you worthy of love. You'll need to start catching yourself when you're about to say something just to please someone else, when you're about to apologize for something that isn't your fault, when you're about to explain yourself to someone who hasn't asked for an explanation. These moments of awareness are the beginning of change. You'll need to start experimenting with setting boundaries, with saying no, with disappointing people sometimes. This will feel uncomfortable at first because you've been trained to believe that your worth depends on keeping everyone happy. But you'll discover that people actually respect you more when you have clear boundaries, when you're not available for everything, when you value your own time and energy. You'll need to start developing what Jung called a relationship with your unconscious, paying attention to your dreams, your intuitions, your gut feelings. You'll need to start trusting your own inner wisdom instead of constantly seeking guidance from others. Most importantly, you'll need to start treating yourself with the same kindness and respect that you've been desperately seeking from others. You'll need to become your own source of validation, your own cheerleader, your own best friend. This isn't about becoming self-absorbed or thinking you're better than everyone else. It's about developing a healthy relationship with yourself, about becoming someone you can rely on, someone you can trust, someone you can respect. When you've done this work, when you've begun to know and accept yourself fully, something profound shifts in your relationships with others. You stop attracting people who want to use your need for validation against you. You stop being drawn to people who are emotionally unavailable or who treat you poorly. Instead, you start attracting people who appreciate your authenticity, who respect your boundaries, who value you for who you truly are, rather than for what you can do for them. Your relationships become deeper, more genuine, more satisfying. You also become more discerning about whose opinions actually matter to you. Instead of caring what everyone thinks about everything, you develop the wisdom to know which people in your life have earned the right to influence your decisions, and which people's opinions are simply noise that you can ignore. This is the beginning of true freedom. This is what it means to break free from validation addiction. It's not about becoming perfect or about never caring what anyone thinks. It's about becoming someone who knows their own worth, who trusts their own judgment, who can love others without needing them to validate their existence. The journey ahead won't always be easy. There will be moments when you'll want to fall back into old patterns, when the pull of seeking approval will feel stronger than your commitment to authenticity. But remember this: every time you choose yourself over others' approval, every time you honor your own truth instead of performing for acceptance, you're building psychological muscle that will serve you for the rest of your life. Jung believed that the goal of human development was not happiness, but wholeness. And wholeness, true psychological integration, is impossible as long as you're living for others' approval instead of your own authentic truth. So ask yourself this: how much longer are you willing to live as a prisoner of other people's opinions? How much longer are you willing to give away your power to people who may not even care about your well-being? How much longer are you willing to betray yourself in the hope that others will accept the false version of yourself that you're presenting? The path to freedom is available to you right now. It starts with a single decision: the decision to value your own opinion of yourself more than anyone else's opinion of you. It starts with the commitment to discover who you really are underneath all the masks and performances and people-pleasing. It starts with the courage to be disliked by some people in exchange for being truly known and loved by the right people. It starts with the wisdom to understand that your worth was never up for debate in the first place. This is your invitation to begin the most important journey of your life. The journey back to yourself. The journey to psychological freedom. The journey to breaking free from validation addiction forever. Now that you've taken the first crucial steps toward recognizing your validation patterns and understanding the deeper psychological roots of this addiction, it's time to confront something that might be even more uncomfortable. The truth is, validation addiction doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It thrives because there are people around you who benefit from your need for approval, who have learned to manipulate your hunger for acceptance, and who will resist your attempts to break free from these patterns. Think about it. When you constantly seek validation, you become predictable. You become manageable. You become useful to others in ways that serve their interests, not yours. And the moment you start to pull back, the moment you begin to question these dynamics, something shifts. The people who have grown accustomed to your validation-seeking behavior will feel threatened by your newfound awareness. This is where the real work begins. Because breaking free from validation addiction isn't just about changing your internal patterns. It's about recognizing the external forces that have been feeding off your need for approval and having the courage to disrupt those dynamics completely. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like in practice. You know that friend who only calls when they need something? That colleague who dismisses your ideas in meetings but expects you to support theirs? That family member who guilt trips you whenever you set a boundary? These aren't coincidences. These are people who have unconsciously learned to exploit your validation addiction for their own benefit. They've figured out that if they withhold approval, you'll work harder for it. If they give you just enough validation to keep you hooked, you'll continue to provide whatever they need from you. It's a psychological economy where your self-worth becomes their currency, and they've been spending it freely while you've been left feeling empty and depleted. The uncomfortable truth is that your validation addiction has been serving everyone except you. It's been making you available for emotional labor that isn't reciprocated. It's been keeping you small so others can feel big. It's been making you the reliable one, the understanding one, the one who always says yes, even when saying no would serve your highest good. But here's what happens when you start to recognize these patterns and refuse to participate in them anymore. The pushback begins. The guilt trips intensify. The accusations start flying. You'll be called selfish, difficult, changed. You'll be told you're not the person they used to know, and they're right. You're not. You're becoming someone who values their own approval more than theirs, and that threatens the entire system they've built around your need for validation. This is why breaking free from validation addiction requires what Carl Jung called moral courage. It's not just the courage to face your own shadows and insecurities. It's the courage to face the fact that some of your relationships have been built on an unhealthy foundation, and that changing yourself means those relationships will either transform or end. The people who truly love you, who want to see you grow and flourish, will support your journey towards self-validation. They'll celebrate your boundaries, respect your no, and find ways to connect with you that don't depend on your need for their approval. But others will resist. They'll test your resolve. They'll try to pull you back into old patterns because your validation-seeking behavior was convenient for them. This is where you'll discover something profound about human nature. Many people don't actually want you to heal. They want you to remain wounded in ways that serve their purposes. They want you to continue seeking their approval because it gives them power over you. Your healing threatens their control, and they'll fight to maintain the status quo. But here's the thing about validation addiction that nobody talks about. It's not just about wanting to be liked or accepted. At its core, it's about a fundamental misunderstanding of where your worth comes from. You've been conditioned to believe that your value is determined by external sources, that you need others to confirm your worth, that you're only as good as your last approval rating. This conditioning runs deep. It starts in childhood when we learn that love is conditional, that we have to earn our place in the world, that being good means being what others want us to be. It continues through school systems that reward conformity, through social media that turns human connection into a popularity contest, through workplaces that demand we sacrifice our authenticity for professional success. By the time we reach adulthood, we've internalized these messages so completely that we don't even realize we're seeking validation. We think we're just being helpful, accommodating, understanding. We think we're building relationships, advancing our careers, being good people. But underneath it all, we're still that child, desperately trying to earn love and acceptance. The path to freedom requires a complete rewiring of these deep-seated beliefs. It means learning to generate your own sense of worth from within, rather than constantly seeking it from others. It means developing what psychologists call internal locus of control, where your sense of self is determined by your own values and standards rather than external approval. This process is both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it frees you from the exhausting cycle of constantly monitoring how others perceive you. Terrifying because it means taking full responsibility for your own happiness and self-worth, without the safety net of external validation to fall back on. But here's what you'll discover as you begin this journey. The approval you've been seeking from others was never really about them. It was about you learning to approve of yourself. The validation you've been craving was always meant to come from within. The love you've been trying to earn from others was always available to you from yourself. This doesn't mean you become cold or disconnected from others. It means you connect from a place of wholeness rather than neediness. You give because you choose to, not because you're trying to earn something in return. You receive feedback without your entire sense of self hanging in the balance. You become someone who can be in relationship without losing yourself in the process. The irony is that when you stop seeking validation from others, you often receive more genuine appreciation and respect. People are drawn to those who are comfortable in their own skin, who don't need constant reassurance, who can stand firm in their values without being defensive or aggressive about it. But this transformation doesn't happen overnight. It requires consistent practice, daily choices to honor your inner voice over external pressure, and the willingness to sit with the discomfort that comes when you stop using others' approval as a drug to numb your insecurities. You'll need to learn new skills. How to sit with uncertainty without immediately seeking reassurance. How to make decisions based on your own wisdom rather than what you think others want to hear. How to receive criticism without it devastating your self-concept. How to offer your gifts to the world without attachment to how they're received. This is deep work. It's shadow work. It's the kind of inner transformation that Jung described as individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, rather than who you think you should be. And it's absolutely essential if you want to break free from the prison of validation addiction and step into the freedom of authentic self-expression. The question isn't whether you can do this work. The question is whether you're willing to. Because breaking free from validation addiction isn't just about changing your behavior. It's about fundamentally altering your relationship with yourself and others. It's about choosing growth over comfort, authenticity over approval, and your own inner wisdom over the crowd's opinion. Are you ready to take that leap? Are you ready to discover who you are when you're not trying to be what others want you to be? Are you ready to find out what becomes possible when you no longer need external validation to feel worthy of love and respect? The journey begins with a single step: the courage to question whether the approval you're seeking is actually worth the price you're paying for it. And from there, everything changes. You've built the foundation through shadow work and boundary setting. You understand the dynamics of manipulation and the power of conscious unavailability. But now comes the real test. The moment when you realize that freedom from validation addiction isn't a destination you arrive at once and forget about. It's a daily practice, a continuous choosing of yourself over the comfortable lie of external approval. Most people get to this point and think they've won. They've cut toxic people from their lives. They've learned to say no. They've discovered their triggers and patterns. But then something happens. A moment of weakness. A particularly harsh criticism, a rejection that hits harder than expected. And suddenly, all that progress feels like it's crumbling. Here's what nobody tells you about breaking free from validation addiction. The urge to seek approval doesn't disappear overnight. It lives in the shadows of your psyche, waiting for moments of vulnerability to resurface. The difference between someone who truly breaks free and someone who just thinks they have is simple. The truly free person expects these moments. They prepare for them. They understand that freedom is not the absence of the urge to seek validation. It's the conscious choice to not act on that urge. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He knew that integration of the shadow was not a one-time event, but a lifelong process. Every time you choose your own truth over someone else's comfort, you're practicing freedom. Every time you resist the urge to explain yourself to someone who doesn't deserve an explanation, you're strengthening your psychological immune system. But here's where it gets dangerous. The moment you think you've mastered this, the moment you become arrogant about your growth, is the moment you become vulnerable again. Because true mastery isn't about never falling back into old patterns. It's about recognizing when you're falling and having the tools to pull yourself out before you're completely submerged. The validation-seeking part of your psyche is cunning. It will disguise itself as noble intentions. It will tell you that you're helping others when you're actually abandoning yourself. It will convince you that this one time is different, that this person deserves your energy, that this situation requires your immediate response. And if you're not vigilant, if you're not brutally honest with yourself, you'll find yourself right back where you started. This is why the work never ends. This is why Jung called individuation a lifelong process. You don't graduate from the need for self-awareness. You don't reach a point where you can coast on past victories. Every day presents new opportunities to choose yourself or to abandon yourself. And the choice you make in each moment determines whether you continue to grow or begin to regress. The people who truly break free from validation addiction understand this. They don't see their journey as a problem to be solved, but as a practice to be maintained. They don't expect perfection from themselves. They expect awareness. They know that there will be days when they slip, when they care too much about what others think, when they give their power away to someone who doesn't deserve it. But they also know that these moments don't define them. What defines them is what they do next. Do they spiral into shame and self-criticism? Do they abandon their progress and return to old patterns? Or do they dust themselves off, learn from the experience, and recommit to their practice of self-validation? The strongest people aren't those who never fall. They're those who fall and get back up. They're those who face their mistakes without destroying themselves over them. They're those who understand that growth is not a straight line, but a spiral. Sometimes you revisit old patterns, but if you're truly growing, you revisit them at a higher level of awareness. This is where the real transformation happens, not in the dramatic moments of cutting people off or setting massive boundaries. Those are important, but they're just the beginning. The real transformation happens in the quiet moments, when you're alone with your thoughts and you choose self-compassion over self-attack. When you catch yourself seeking approval and redirect that energy towards self-validation instead. When you notice the old patterns arising and you breathe through them instead of acting on them. The validation-addicted person looks for a cure, a final solution, a moment of arrival where they never have to deal with these feelings again. But the truly free person understands that freedom is not the absence of the struggle. It's the presence of choice within the struggle. It's the ability to feel the old urges without being controlled by them. This is what Jung meant when he talked about holding the tension of opposites. You can simultaneously feel the desire for approval and choose not to seek it. You can feel hurt by someone's rejection and still maintain your boundaries. You can want to be understood and still refuse to over-explain yourself. The mastery is not in eliminating these feelings, but in not being enslaved by them. And here's the beautiful paradox. The moment you stop needing validation is often the moment you start receiving genuine appreciation. Not because you're seeking it, but because you're being authentically yourself. People are drawn to those who are comfortable in their own skin. They're attracted to those who don't need their approval to feel worthy. But by then, it doesn't matter as much, because you've learned to generate your own sense of worth. You've learned to validate your own experiences. You've learned to trust your own judgment. The approval of others becomes a nice bonus rather than a desperate need. This is the final stage of breaking free from validation addiction. Not the elimination of the desire for approval, but the transformation of your relationship with that desire. You feel it, you acknowledge it, and then you choose your own path regardless. You become the author of your own story, rather than a character in someone else's narrative. The journey from validation addiction to self-validation is not a comfortable one. It requires you to face parts of yourself you'd rather ignore. It demands that you sit with uncomfortable emotions rather than numbing them with external approval. It asks you to trust yourself, even when everyone else disagrees with you. But the freedom that comes from this journey is unlike anything else. It's the freedom to be yourself without apology. It's the freedom to make choices based on your own values rather than others' expectations. It's the freedom to love yourself even when others don't understand you. This is not a destination you arrive at and then forget about. It's a practice you commit to for life. Every day, you wake up and choose yourself. Every day, you decide whether to seek validation from others or generate it from within. Every day you practice the art of being whole, complete, and worthy, exactly as you are. The validation addicts remain trapped in their endless cycle of seeking and never finding. But you've learned the secret. You've discovered that everything you were looking for outside yourself was already within you. You've broken free from the prison of other people's opinions and stepped into the vast expanse of your own authentic existence. And that, more than any external validation could ever provide, is true freedom. Now let me show you the invisible force that will either make or break your entire journey away from validation addiction. Because everything we've discussed about boundaries, self-awareness, and breaking free from external approval means nothing if you don't understand the psychological warfare happening in your mind every single day. You see, validation addiction isn't just about wanting approval. It's about a fundamental betrayal of your own psyche. It's about living in a state of constant internal conflict, where part of you knows you're betraying yourself, while another part desperately clings to the safety of being liked, being accepted, being seen as good. And this internal war is exhausting you. It's why you feel drained after social interactions. It's why you lie awake at night replaying conversations, wondering if you said the right thing, if you came across the right way. You're not just seeking validation from others. You're seeking validation from a version of yourself that has been programmed to value external approval over internal truth. But here's what nobody tells you about this process. The reason breaking free from validation addiction feels so terrifying isn't because you might lose people. It's because you might lose the version of yourself that you've constructed to survive in a world that rewards conformity and punishes authenticity. Think about it. How much of your personality, your opinions, your way of being in the world has been shaped by what gets positive responses from others? How much of who you think you are is actually just a collection of behaviors that have been reinforced by external validation? This is where the real work begins. Because true freedom from validation addiction requires you to deconstruct this false self and rebuild from your authentic core. And that authentic core has been buried under years, maybe decades, of conditioning that taught you to be what others needed you to be. The process is brutal because it requires you to face the possibility that much of what you've called your personality is actually just adaptive strategies. The way you laugh at jokes you don't find funny. The way you agree with opinions you don't hold. The way you minimize your own needs to avoid conflict. All of this has to be examined, questioned, and potentially discarded. But here's where it gets even more complex. As you begin to strip away these adaptive layers, you'll discover that some people in your life were never actually relating to you. They were relating to your persona, your mask, your performance. And when you stop performing, when you stop being endlessly accommodating, when you stop being the version of yourself that requires no maintenance from them, they'll begin to show you who they really are. This is when the real psychological pressure begins. Because these people will not let you go quietly. They will use every tool at their disposal to pull you back into the old dynamic. They'll use guilt, manipulation, emotional blackmail, and something even more insidious. They'll make you question your own perception of reality. They'll tell you that you're being selfish, that you've changed, that you're not the person they used to know. They'll weaponize your own desire to be good, to be understanding, to be reasonable. They'll make you feel like your boundary setting is cruelty, like your self-protection is selfishness, like your refusal to be endlessly available is abandonment. And this is where most people break. Because the psychological pressure of being misunderstood, of being labeled as difficult or cold or selfish, triggers every fear that created the validation addiction in the first place. The fear of abandonment, the fear of not being lovable, the fear of being fundamentally flawed. But here's what you need to understand. This pressure, this discomfort, this sense of being misunderstood is not a sign that you're going in the wrong direction. It's a sign that you're finally threatening a system that has been using you. It's a sign that you're finally choosing yourself over the comfort of others. The people who truly love you, who truly see you, who truly want what's best for you will support your journey toward authenticity, even when it's uncomfortable for them. They will respect your boundaries, even when those boundaries inconvenience them. They will love the real you. Not just the version of you that makes their lives easier, but those who only valued you for what you provided, for how you made them feel, for the role you played in their emotional ecosystem. They will resist your transformation with everything they have. Because your freedom threatens their comfort, your authenticity exposes their own inauthenticity. Your refusal to be controlled reveals their need to control. This is why the journey away from validation addiction is so lonely. It's why it feels like you're losing yourself even as you're finding yourself. It's why it requires a kind of courage that most people never develop. Because you're not just changing your behavior, you're changing your entire relationship with reality. You're moving from a reality where your worth is determined by others to a reality where your worth is inherent. You're moving from a reality where love is conditional to a reality where love is a choice. You're moving from a reality where you must earn your place to a reality where you belong simply because you exist. This transformation requires you to develop what I call psychological sovereignty. The ability to remain centered in your own truth even when everyone around you is telling you that truth is wrong. The ability to trust your own perception even when others are trying to convince you that you are seeing things incorrectly. The ability to love yourself even when others withdraw their love as punishment for your authenticity. And here's the paradox. The more you stop seeking validation, the more you become worthy of genuine validation. The more you stop trying to be lovable, the more genuinely lovable you become. The more you stop performing, the more your authentic self emerges. And that authentic self is magnetic in a way that performance never can be. But this magnetism attracts a different kind of person. It attracts people who are also on their own journey toward authenticity. It attracts people who value depth over surface, truth over comfort, growth over stagnation. It attracts people who can handle your full humanity, not just the parts that are easy to love. The relationships you build from this place of authenticity will be different. They'll be based on mutual respect rather than mutual need. They'll be based on choice rather than obligation. They'll be based on love rather than fear. And they'll be able to withstand the inevitable challenges that come with two authentic people trying to build something real together. But to get there, you must first be willing to lose everything that isn't real. You must be willing to let go of relationships that only exist because you're willing to betray yourself to maintain them. You must be willing to disappoint people who only approve of you when you're diminishing yourself. You must be willing to be alone rather than be in connection that requires you to abandon your own soul. This is the price of freedom from validation addiction, and it's a price that most people are unwilling to pay. But for those who are willing, who have the courage to walk through the fire of transformation, what awaits on the other side is a life of unprecedented authenticity, depth, and genuine connection. The question is, are you ready to pay that price? Are you ready to choose yourself, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted? Are you ready to discover who you really are beneath all the layers of conditioning and adaptation? Because once you make that choice, once you commit to that path, there's no going back. You can't unsee what you've seen, unknow what you've learned, unfeel what you've felt. The journey toward authenticity is irreversible, but it's also the only path that leads to true freedom, true love, and true peace. When you finally decide to stop chasing external validation, something remarkable happens. The world doesn't end. People don't abandon you. Instead, something far more profound begins to unfold. You start to discover who you actually are beneath all the performances, beneath all the desperate attempts to be seen and accepted. This is where the real journey begins. This is where you step into authentic power. The process of breaking free from validation addiction isn't a destination you reach. It's a way of being you cultivate. Every single day, you're presented with choices. Do you speak your truth or do you say what others want to hear? Do you honor your boundaries or do you bend them to avoid conflict? Do you trust your inner knowing or do you defer to the crowd? These moments of choice are where your freedom is won or lost. Jung understood that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires what he called moral courage. Not the courage to fight external battles, but the courage to face yourself completely. To look at your shadow aspects, your fears, your wounds, and to integrate them rather than project them onto others. This is the deepest work of liberation from validation addiction because it addresses the root cause, not just the symptoms. Most people never reach this level of self-ownership because it requires something our culture actively discourages. It requires you to disappoint people. It requires you to be misunderstood. It requires you to stand alone sometimes, even when every fiber of your being screams for acceptance and belonging. The validation addict in you will fight this process with everything it has because it threatens the very foundation of how you've learned to survive in the world. But here's what they don't tell you about this journey: the loneliness you feared, the rejection you avoided, the disapproval you ran from. None of it is as devastating as you imagined. What's devastating is spending your entire life as a stranger to yourself. What's devastating is reaching the end of your days and realizing you never once lived from your authentic center because you were too busy performing for an audience that was never really watching anyway. The people who truly matter, the ones capable of real connection, they don't want your performance. They want your presence. They want your truth. They want the raw, unfiltered essence of who you are, not the polished version you think will make them stay. When you stop seeking validation, you discover something extraordinary about human relationships. The shallow ones fall away naturally, but the deep ones become deeper. The real ones become more real. This is because authentic relating can only happen between two people who are willing to be seen. When you're constantly performing, constantly seeking approval, constantly adjusting yourself to match what you think others want, you're not actually in relationship, you're in a transaction. You're trading pieces of your soul for temporary acceptance, and everyone involved knows it on some level, even if they can't articulate it. Breaking free from validation addiction means accepting that you cannot control how others perceive you. You cannot manage their emotions, their reactions, their decisions about whether to stay or go. This acceptance is simultaneously terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it means giving up the illusion of control. Liberating because it means you can finally stop exhausting yourself trying to be everything to everyone. The validation addict believes that if they just try hard enough, if they just say the right things, if they just meet enough needs, they can guarantee love and acceptance. But this is a fool's errand. Real love cannot be earned or manufactured. It can only be received by someone willing to be truly seen. And you cannot be truly seen while you're hiding behind a mask of who you think you should be. Jung wrote extensively about the persona, the mask we wear to interface with the world. The persona isn't inherently bad. We all need social personas to function in different contexts. The problem arises when we become so identified with our personas that we lose touch with who we are underneath them. The validation addict has typically constructed multiple personas, each designed to please different people or fit different situations, but none of them representing their authentic self. The work of individuation involves gradually peeling away these false layers, these adaptive strategies that once served to protect you but now imprison you. This process is often accompanied by what Jung called the dark night of the soul, a period of confusion and disorientation as you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. This is normal. This is necessary. This is the birth canal of authentic selfhood. During this phase, you might find yourself feeling lost, unsure of your preferences, your values, your desires. This is because for so long, your preferences have been determined by what would please others. Your values have been borrowed from those whose approval you sought. Your desires have been shaped by what you thought would make you acceptable. Now you're being asked to discover what you actually think, feel, and want, independent of external validation. This is delicate work that requires patience and self-compassion. You're essentially reparenting yourself, teaching yourself that your worth is not contingent on performance. You're learning to validate yourself, to trust your own judgment, to honor your own needs. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process of building a new relationship with yourself based on unconditional self-acceptance rather than conditional self-approval. The validation addict often struggles with decision-making because they've been so focused on what others want that they've lost touch with their own inner guidance system. Learning to trust your intuition, to make choices based on your own values and desires rather than on what will please others, is a crucial part of this healing process. Start small. Practice making decisions about minor things based solely on what feels right to you, not on what others might think or expect. As you begin to trust yourself more, you'll notice that your relationships start to shift. Some people will be threatened by your newfound authenticity. They were comfortable with the version of you that sought their approval because it gave them a sense of power and control. When you stop seeking their validation, when you stop being so available for their emotional needs, when you start setting boundaries and speaking your truth, they may react with anger, guilt-tripping, or withdrawal. This is not a reflection of your worth. This is information about the nature of those relationships. Healthy relationships can weather the storms of individual growth and change. Unhealthy relationships often cannot survive when one person stops playing their assigned role in the dysfunctional dynamic. This can be painful, but it's also clarifying. It helps you distinguish between those who love you for who you are and those who love you for what you do for them. The journey from validation addiction to authentic self-acceptance is ultimately a spiritual journey. It's about recognizing that your worth is inherent, not earned. It's about understanding that you are enough, exactly as you are, without needing to prove it to anyone. It's about learning to love yourself, not because you're perfect, but because you're human, and human beings deserve love simply by virtue of existing. This doesn't mean you stop growing or improving. It means you do so from a place of self-love rather than self-hatred. It means you pursue growth because it feels expansive and joyful, not because you're trying to fix something fundamentally wrong with you. It means you offer your gifts to the world because you want to contribute, not because you need to prove your value. The ultimate freedom from validation addiction comes when you realize that you are the only person whose approval you truly need. When you can look in the mirror and feel genuine love and acceptance for the person looking back at you, when you can trust your own judgment and honor your own needs, when you can set boundaries without guilt and speak your truth without apology, then you have achieved something rare and precious in this world. You have achieved psychological sovereignty. This sovereignty doesn't make you selfish or uncaring. In fact, it makes you more capable of genuine love and service because you're no longer motivated by need and desperation. You're motivated by choice and abundance. You give because you want to give, not because you need something in return. You love because love is your nature, not because you're trying to earn love back. The person who has freed themselves from validation addiction becomes a beacon of possibility for others. They show by example that it's possible to live authentically, to be true to yourself, to trust your own worth. They give others permission to do the same, simply by being who they are without apology. This is perhaps the greatest gift you can give to the world, the gift of your authentic presence, your genuine self, your truth lived boldly and without compromise. When you decide to break free from validation addiction, you're not just changing a habit, you're dismantling an entire system of survival that you've built your life around. You're choosing to walk away from the safety net of external approval and into the unknown territory of internal sovereignty. And that terrifies most people because it means you're about to become completely unpredictable. The reality is that validation addiction has kept you manageable, controllable. When you need approval from others, you're always negotiating, always compromising, always making sure you don't rock the boat too much. But when you stop needing that approval, when you stop caring about whether people like your decisions or understand your choices, something powerful happens. You become dangerous to the status quo. People can sense when someone no longer needs their permission to exist. They can feel when you've stopped playing by the unwritten rules of emotional dependency. And it makes them deeply uncomfortable because your freedom reflects their own captivity. Your willingness to be misunderstood highlights their desperate need to be accepted. Your comfort with solitude exposes their fear of being alone with themselves. This is why the path to internal validation is so lonely. Not because you're choosing isolation, but because you're choosing authenticity. And authenticity has a way of separating you from those who are still wearing masks. When you stop pretending to be someone you're not, you discover that many of your relationships were built on false foundations. People weren't loving you, they were loving the version of you that made them comfortable. The death of your validation addiction is the birth of your true self. But like any birth, it's messy and painful, and requires you to let go of what came before. You'll lose friends who only knew how to relate to your neediness. You'll lose opportunities that required you to dim your light. You'll lose the comfortable illusion that you can control how others perceive you, but what you gain is immeasurable. You gain the ability to trust your own judgment without constantly seeking confirmation from others. You gain the power to make decisions based on your values rather than on what will make people like you. You gain the freedom to express your truth without calculating the social cost. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process of catching yourself in the act of seeking approval and consciously choosing a different path. Every time you resist the urge to explain yourself to someone who doesn't deserve an explanation, you're building internal strength. Every time you choose authenticity over acceptance, you're feeding your true self instead of your ego. The key is understanding that validation addiction is not about love. It's about control. When you need constant approval, you're trying to control how others see you, how they feel about you, how they respond to you. But this kind of control is an illusion that comes at the cost of your freedom. Real love, real connection, real relationships can only exist when you're willing to be seen as you truly are, not as you think you should be. Breaking free from validation addiction means accepting that some people will never understand you, some will judge you, some will reject you, and that's perfectly fine, because their opinion of you is not your reality. Their inability to see your worth doesn't diminish your value. Their rejection doesn't define your worth. The strongest people are those who have learned to validate themselves. They've developed an internal compass that guides them through life's challenges without needing constant external confirmation. They've built a relationship with themselves that is so solid, so grounded, that the opinions of others become interesting data points rather than sources of emotional turbulence. This doesn't mean you become cold or disconnected from others. It means you relate to people from a place of wholeness rather than neediness. You give love freely without expecting it to be returned in specific ways. You receive appreciation gracefully without becoming dependent on it. You create boundaries not to punish others, but to protect your own energy and maintain your center. The journey from validation addiction to internal sovereignty is ultimately about growing up emotionally. It's about taking responsibility for your own happiness, your own sense of worth, your own peace of mind. It's about recognizing that you came into this world complete and whole, and that no amount of external approval can add to or subtract from that fundamental truth. When you finally break free from the need for constant validation, you discover something remarkable. You realize that the approval you were seeking from others was always available within yourself. You had the power to validate your own experiences, your own feelings, your own worth all along. You just forgot how to access it because you were so focused on looking outside yourself for what was already inside. This is the ultimate freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want without consequences, but the freedom to be who you are without apology. The freedom to make mistakes without catastrophizing. The freedom to be human without needing to be perfect. The freedom to live your life according to your own values rather than according to the expectations of others. And when you reach this place of internal validation, something beautiful happens. You stop attracting people who need to control you because you're no longer controllable. You stop attracting relationships based on neediness because you're no longer needy. You start attracting people who appreciate your authenticity, who respect your boundaries, who love you for who you are, rather than for what you can do for them. This is what it means to break free from validation addiction forever. It's not about never caring what anyone thinks. It's about caring more about what you think. It's about building such a strong relationship with yourself that external opinions become background noise rather than the soundtrack of your life. It's about finally coming home to yourself and realizing that you are enough. You have always been enough, and you will always be enough, regardless of what anyone else says or thinks or believes about you. The path to freedom from validation addiction isn't just about breaking a habit. It's about fundamentally rewiring your relationship with yourself and the world around you. When you begin to understand that your worth isn't determined by external applause, criticism, or indifference, you step into a realm of psychological sovereignty that most people never experience. This isn't about becoming cold or disconnected from others. Instead, it's about connecting from a place of fullness rather than emptiness, offering rather than taking, loving rather than needing. Think about the difference between a person who enters a room desperately scanning for approval versus someone who walks in with quiet confidence, genuinely curious about others and comfortable in their own skin. The first person is constantly performing, adjusting their behavior based on perceived reactions, living in a state of chronic anxiety about how they're being received. The second person is present, authentic, and paradoxically more attractive to others because they're not grasping for anything. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it's crucial to understand that setbacks are part of the process. You might find yourself slipping back into old patterns, seeking that familiar rush of external validation. When this happens, don't judge yourself harshly. Instead, observe it with curiosity. What triggered this response? What part of you felt threatened or insecure? These moments of regression are actually valuable opportunities for deeper self-understanding. The shadow work we discussed earlier becomes your most powerful tool in these moments. When you feel that familiar pull toward validation-seeking behavior, pause and ask yourself what you're really seeking. Are you looking for love, safety, recognition? Understanding what's driving the behavior allows you to address the real need, rather than the surface symptom. You might discover that beneath the need for approval lies a deeper longing for connection, belonging, or simply the reassurance that you matter. As you continue this journey, you'll notice that your relationships begin to shift dramatically. Some people who were drawn to your previous validation-seeking behavior might become uncomfortable with your newfound independence. They may try to pull you back into old patterns through guilt, manipulation, or withdrawal of attention. This is one of the most challenging aspects of breaking free from validation addiction, realizing that not everyone in your life wants you to be psychologically healthy and autonomous. The people who truly love and respect you will celebrate your growth, even if it means they need to adjust their own behavior. They'll appreciate your newfound authenticity and the deeper, more genuine connection it makes possible. Meanwhile, those who benefited from your dependency or who are threatened by your independence will likely reveal their true nature. This can be painful, but it's also liberating. You're no longer investing energy in relationships that were built on dysfunction. Building internal validation requires developing a strong relationship with your inner voice, not the critical voice that echoes societal expectations, but the deeper wisdom that knows your authentic self. This voice often speaks quietly, especially at first, because it's been drowned out by the noise of external demands for so long. Learning to hear and trust this voice is like developing a new sense. It requires practice, patience, and faith. Start by creating regular space for solitude and reflection. This doesn't necessarily mean formal meditation, though that can be helpful. It might be as simple as taking walks without podcasts or music, sitting quietly with your morning coffee, or journaling about your thoughts and feelings without censoring yourself. The goal is to create space where your authentic self can emerge without the pressure of external performance. As you develop this internal compass, you'll find that decision-making becomes clearer and more aligned with your true values. Instead of asking, "What will others think?" you'll naturally ask, "What feels right for me?" This shift in orientation is profound. It moves you from a reactive stance to a proactive one, from being controlled by external forces to being guided by internal wisdom. The integration of your shadow, those parts of yourself you've rejected or hidden, becomes essential to this process. Validation addiction often stems from splitting ourselves into acceptable and unacceptable parts, then desperately trying to get approval for the acceptable parts while hiding or denying the rest. True wholeness means embracing all of yourself, including the parts that don't fit societal expectations or that you've been taught to be ashamed of. This doesn't mean acting out every impulse or abandoning social consideration. Instead, it means acknowledging all aspects of yourself with compassion and choosing consciously how to express them. When you're not fighting against parts of yourself, you free up enormous amounts of energy that can be directed toward authentic self-expression and meaningful goals. The ultimate freedom from validation addiction comes when you realize that you are both the validator and the validated. You don't need to wait for external permission to approve of yourself, to be proud of your efforts, or to love yourself unconditionally. This self-love isn't narcissistic. It's the foundation that allows you to love others genuinely, without hidden agendas or unconscious manipulation. As you embody this transformation, you become a beacon for others who are struggling with their own validation addiction. Your presence alone demonstrates that another way is possible. You show others that they don't have to live in constant fear of judgment or rejection, that they can trust their own inner wisdom, and that authentic relationships are not only possible but far more fulfilling than those built on performance and pretense. Remember that this journey is not about perfection, but about progress. There will be days when you feel rock solid in your self-worth and others when you question everything. Both experiences are normal and valuable. The key is to maintain your commitment to authenticity and self-compassion, regardless of external circumstances. So here we are at the end of our exploration, but really this is just the beginning of your journey toward authentic freedom. The path away from validation addiction isn't a destination you arrive at once and never leave. It's a continuous practice of choosing yourself over the opinions of others, day after day, moment after moment. Remember that every time you catch yourself seeking external approval, you have a choice. You can either fall back into old patterns or use that awareness as a doorway to deeper self-understanding. The discomfort you feel when you stop performing for others is actually a sign that you're growing, that you're breaking free from the prison of other people's expectations. Your authentic self has been waiting patiently beneath all those layers of conditioning and people-pleasing. It's been there all along, whispering truths that your validation-seeking mind tried to silence. Now you have the tools to listen. Shadow work, boundary setting, self-compassion, and the courage to disappoint others in service of your own integrity. The irony is beautiful. The moment you stop desperately seeking love and approval from others, you become infinitely more lovable. When you're no longer performing or manipulating for validation, people can finally see and connect with the real you. The relationships that remain will be built on solid ground, not on the shifting sands of performance and pretense. This journey requires tremendous courage, but you already possess everything you need within yourself. Trust your inner wisdom. Honor your boundaries. Embrace your shadows. Choose self-love over self-abandonment. The world needs your authentic expression, not another person hiding behind masks of acceptability. Your freedom from validation addiction is not just a personal victory. It's a gift to everyone around you. When you model authentic self-acceptance, you give others permission to do the same. So take that first step today. Your liberated self is waiting, and the world is ready for who you truly are.